living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. Let's connect you with two members from the House of Delegates. Barry Knight, good to see you.
Good to see you, Woody.
Jay Leftwich, good to see you, sir.
Hello, Woody. Good to be back.
Little changes. I understand that you have a leadership position in the Republican minority now. Talk to us about that.
It's a different day, obviously. I realize I probably wouldn't be quite as busy with committee assignments this session, so after talking to a couple colleagues, I decided to run for the whip position. If you look at the definition of whip, it says it's an enforcer. I really see it more as a communication structure, and so I'm learning the ropes and got some advice from Nick Rush, who was a whip last year, did a great job, and actually also reached out to Jackson Miller, who was here a couple cycles ago, and I'm getting my sea legs.
So what changes in terms of your committee assignments?
So last year I was on 4 full committees: education, general laws, courts, and privileged elections. I've come off of education and be the first time in 16 years or 18 years since I haven't had my fingers into the education pie, and I came off of privileged elections, but I was fortunate enough to get back on general laws and courts, which I'm happy about, very happy about that.
And Barry, you're still on appropriations, I hope.
Yes, I'm on appropriations, general laws, and rules, and they took me off of agriculture. I had 4 committees last year, and talking about workload, last year I was on 4 full committees. I was subcommittee chairman for 4 committees. I sat on 10 subcommittees, and I was a conferee, and VPAP did a graph, and they showed who had the heaviest workload in the General Assembly, and myself and Jay Leftwich were number 1 and number 2 on workload, so it's greatly diminished this year, being a minority.
So how's the Hampton Roads area doing? We were talking earlier about the statewide average unemployment rate is about 2.6% now.
Yes.
And for a while, because of what's going on in Washington, especially in terms of the defense budget, your district in that area in general was not faring well.
They weren't. We were kind of dragging the whole state down, Hampton Roads was, but now with this extra defense spending and increased tonnage going through the Port of Virginia, we're back up to the state average now, which is, like you said, a 2.6% unemployment rate, which in my mind is an effective 0. So we're doing very well there.
And I assume your constituents are feeling those same effects in terms of businesses and things like that?
Absolutely. Even though Chesapeake is probably about a 45-minute to 60-minute commute to Newport News, we have a lot of people who work at Newport News Shipbuilding, so that their hiring has increased decreased the unemployment rate in Chesapeake, and we also are the home to a lot of service members, and so the naval presence and the shipbuilding has been a boon for my city.
How big a deal are e-cigarettes or vapor products in your district?
I don't know that it's, well, so you talk to any high school student, and every one of them has tried Juul, which is not necessarily the same thing as vapes. But what brought my attention to it were these articles of people dying from rapidly onset of lung disease or problems. And so what I've come to learn is that most of the people who are suffering from that are those who buy the vaping products on the black market. There is no regulatory scheme for vaping products, and so the product is not so bad as it is the device that they're smoking the vapes in. And what happens is when the device gets heated up, the chemicals are released, and if you've used inferior metals or product to make it, you're ingesting that into the lung, and it can cause severe problems and death in many cases. So I've introduced 2 bills to try to address that. The first is requiring the distributors and manufacturers to register and be qualified to conduct business in Virginia. And then the second piece of that is to make it a Class 1 misdemeanor to distribute any product in Virginia that when you're not registered. And so hopefully that will still allow people the freedom to do what they want to do. I mean, I think smoking cigarettes is a bad idea, but it's not going to kill you overnight, whereas some of these black market vapor products will do. But it'll regulate it. It'll take the bad actors out of the system and hopefully just leave legitimate distributors to market in Virginia.
And Barry, as we all know, technologies are a double-edged sword. These unmanned aerial vehicles are being used by criminals now around our correctional facilities, and I know you have some legislation dealing with that.
I do. They're illegal to fly over federal jails or installations, correctional units, but there's no law in the books that says they can't fly over local and state jails. So I've put it in the bill, and there may be a little nuance about maybe I can't control the airspace over them. So I've talked to the drone manufacturers, which what we always try to do is have a compromise. They can put software in these drones that can put the lat and long in there that can keep them from flying over.
Latitude and longitude?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So if we can put the software in these drones when they're manufactured to keep them from flying over, then that's great, because all I want to do is solve a problem. And the problem is there's numerous reports of dropping contraband in, whether it's drugs, cell phones, money, whatever it is. I'd like to try to fix a problem. I don't care how we fix it, as long as we fix it.
Yeah, I think there have been a few news reports about those kinds of things being used to transport drugs.
That's exactly what happened. I happened to read it in the newspaper, and I said, well, sounds like a good idea for a piece of legislation. Then a couple of weeks later, a newspaper reporter called me up and said, where'd you get this idea? And I said, well, let me check my folder. And I said, well, ma'am, you're the one that wrote the newspaper article, so I got it from you.
Now, what's happening in terms of prescription drug costs? They seem to continue to rise, and there's no relief.
Actually, there's a personal story behind a couple of bills that I filed, Woody. I have a 10-year-old, and he was recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And so whenever that happens to you, your circle of friends and acquaintances expands. And talking to a lot of families who have children who are diabetic, I became aware of the unreasonable, in my opinion, cost of insulin. And then as Delegate Knight was saying, you know, if you read, you learn all kinds of things. And so I read a couple articles online about you know, young adults dying because they were rationing their insulin. And insulin has been around for over 100 years, and there's no reason why it should cost how much it does. So after doing a little bit of research, I found out that Colorado had passed a bill that put a cap on insulin. And you know, not knowing how that bill would fare, I met with Legislative Services, which is the body here that drafts a lot of the legislation, does research for us, and they informed me of perhaps 2 other ways to try to address that problem. The second way was to have transparency in how pharmaceuticals products are priced, requiring them to report what it costs to bring a drug to market, including rebates. So what happens is you have a drug artificially sold at one price so that they can set that price to the consumer, but then a rebate is given.
Mm-hmm.
So the person who's distributing it is actually only paying $25, but they can say the retail price was $200,
Right.
but they get a $175 rebate. So one bill addresses the transparency issue, and Delegate Hodges I've relied on heavily in this. He is very knowledgeable about this.
He's a pharmacist by background.
He is a pharmacist, and I don't want to steal any of his thunder. I mean, he is the guru of this field, and I've relied on him a great deal in trying to educate myself on some of these issues. The third idea that was provided to me is to set up a system where Virginia could import maintenance drugs from Canada. The federal government has passed legislation allowing states to do this, but the department head in Washington, D.C.,
Mm-hmm.
whoever manages FDA, has not signed off on any state plan to allow it. So it's allowed, but no plan has been approved. So this bill would allow a mechanism to be set up so that if it was actually approved by the appropriate department on a national level, that Virginia could do it. Quite frankly, as Barry knows, and many times when you're up here, you take small bites, and so I've kind of told people that I'm most interested in insulin, and if we can fix that problem, then the other issues, because as you can imagine, a lot of the industry do not like my bills.
Sure. So what's the definition of a maintenance drug?
Well, the way I would define it would be someone who's on a monthly drug for high blood pressure, heart disease, insulin, something that you literally have to take every day or on a routine basis to simply stay alive. And we should be trying to get the cost of those drugs down. And so in actuality, a member of the General Assembly on the other side of the aisle has introduced the same insulin drug, Delegate Lee Carter. And while we may not, I don't know that two people could be further apart ideologically, I've reached out to Delegate Carter, and we have agreed to work together on this legislation because it's just the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Because of sequestration, we've got a lot more people employed. They're employed at higher salaries, but we've got some problems with lottery revenue as that relates to these, what do they call them, gray machines?
Yes. Last year we had these gray machines came in, and there was about 300 to 400 of them in the state, and we didn't know if they were going to be a problem, but we've got reports of not 300 or 400, but 14,000 of them.
So what
now.
are they?
Well, from what I understand, they're typically like slot machines. They're trying to tell you they're games of skill, but from what we understand, they're not games of skill. There's a lawsuit from the city of Charlottesville that's enjoined 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 more counties or localities in Virginia to try to have a court case to do away with them. We know that they're hurting the horse racing. We know they're hurting the lottery. We can see a direct effect to the lottery. So there's two options. We're going to regulate them or we're going to ban them. And I saw that minority leader Tommy Norman may be putting in a bill. David Bulova, chairman of General Laws, may be putting in a bill. But I saw that the chairman of Senate Finance, Janet Howell, says she's putting in a bill to ban these machines. So if they ban them, then we'll have the lottery in Virginia, we'll have historical horse racing, and then we've got a casino bill that last year was put into the budget, which passed. I helped draft that bill. What that bill is going to say is there's 5 localities in the state of Virginia with a $200 million minimum. We know that the Pamunkey Indian tribe has federal recognition. They can absolutely and positively come to Richmond and Norfolk are 2 sites they've identified, so they're going to come and they'll be a sovereign nation. We'll have no say-so. We've offered them the option of maybe a couple of years earlier coming with the state through the commercial situation. They've agreed to that. So we've got 5 locations, Abington, Danville, Portsmouth, Norfolk, and Richmond. And Portsmouth and Norfolk are kind of close, but Senator Lucas has been pushing for Portsmouth for 25 years. She's committed to that locality. The Indians are committed to Norfolk. So what my bill does is it fleshes out all the parameters of giving the lottery the oversight for background checks, taking in and counting the money and everything, but that's only if these 5 localities have a referendum and they decide that yes, they want to pursue casinos in these 5 localities only. So I'm not legalizing casino gambling. What I'm doing is I'm allowing these 5 localities to have a referendum to see if they want it, and if they don't, it goes away on that locality. And if they do, then they have to adhere to the conditions of the legislation, and the lottery will have the parameters fleshed out for them.
I think you had mentioned earlier that these gray machines also hurt charitable institutions like churches and bingo.
So there's a sub-story as to what you are talking about, and the charitable gaming, like traditionally the bingo, has been hurt really bad. In fact, I think someone told me that there are 30 bingo halls that have closed throughout the state.
That many?
In the last year or two. You know, as I told, so what they would like to see done is allow them to compete on the same level. If you're going to allow the gray machines, then let us operate under the same set of standards, so that we can compete. They're not afraid of competition. So again, as Delegate Knight said, we have a choice of either banning the gray machines, or I think in fairness, we need to allow the charitable gaming folks to do the same thing. I mean, these is the Moose Lodge, all of the VFW, all of these organizations that give hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars back to the community, to schools, to veterans, families in need, the homeless, and so I think we need to do something to try to right that ship.
And of course, the direct impact is to public education, because those lottery proceeds go to help fund our schools.
Yes. The problem with banning the gray machines is that the governor's current budget, I think, has $140 million, 70 in the first year and 70 in the second year of revenue.
50 and 75.
50. Right. Okay.
And what the governor said was, he said that if we're going to regulate them, that we will take a minimum of 50 million the first year and 75 the second year. But he said, but if you want to ban them, he kind of left it open. That was okay too.
Then we leave a hole in the budget.
Well, he said it's a direct correlation.
Okay.
If you do away with the gray machines and we don't get that money will rise right back to the lottery again. They think it's a direct correlation with gray machines taking money away from the lottery.
Okay.
Well, speaking of the budget, I'm sure you've had an opportunity to at least review it at some level. What do you think of the governor's budget?
Well, it looks to me like this governor has done what every governor has done. They've loaded up the back end of the budget when that governor's not going to be here for accountability.
Why is that?
They all do that. They want to try to make everybody happy. For example, we gave 5% teacher raises last year. Jay Leftwich, he's been on Chesapeake School Board forever, has been on education forever. He's a great advocate for teachers' salaries raises. We gave him 5%. We said within 4 years we want to get them to parity with the United States. This year the governor's budget has a 0 increase for teachers. But on the second year, he's given them 3%. Well, the teachers are awful upset about this, and that's just one portion of the budget, but I think we need to take care of the teachers, because my mother was a school teacher, and Jay and I represent Chesapeake together. They've got a fantastic school system, as does Virginia Beach and some others, and it's a direct correlation with paying the teachers. Well, with the rest of the budget, we see some more of these things in it and it's not just this governor, it's all governors. Sure. They want to try to say, we're going to give you this and you this and you this. Now, I'm the good guy. Legislators, y'all figure out how to pay for it.
So your local school districts are going to be hurting again, at least in terms of teacher salaries, at least this year.
Well, what's not on the LIS system yet is I've put in a budget amendment that would recalibrate the the cap on support staff. Having come from a school board and from a superintendent who was probably one of the most vocal superintendents in the state about school funding, his focus while he was a superintendent was, we need to go back, by simply changing the mathematical formula on support staff, we lost hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, and that's statewide, if not a billion. I mean, it was a massive cut to education, and from what I understand, the idea at the time was, well, when the revenues come back, we can go back and revisit this issue, and no one has. Although a lot of refunds have been restored, the support staff formula has not been revised to go back to the way it used to be. And so I've put in a budget amendment to do that. And if we can get something of that through the General Assembly this session, then that would help a great deal in the salaries and the staffing in the schools. Now again, I'm not on appropriations. I don't know where all the acorns are. Hoping that with the increase in revenue or the revenue projections, there's something there to help out with that.
And Barry, one of your favorite subjects, of course, relates to whether we're going to continue to regulate menhaden fish.
That's right. It's been a battle I've been, fighting ever since I've been up here. Senator Cosgrove represents Chesapeake, of course, also was carrying this legislation before I got here 12 years ago. And but I've been fighting that battle pretty hard. This year it's got some legs because the United States Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, responded to a letter from 9 governors that said it looks like that omega protein, the menhaden fishery, is overfishing. They were allowed 51,000 metric tons in Chesapeake Bay. They sent out a press release and said, we're not going to pay attention to that. We're going to do more than that because we believe that science shows that there's more menhaden out there. Well, what my bill is going to say is, show me the science, because right now the legislators from the entire state are regulating this little fish that most of the legislators couldn't identify. So we're regulating it. It's the only thing that swims in the water that we regulate. I say take it out of the hands of the politicians and put it into the hands of the scientists, which is the Virginia Marine Resource Commission. And I know the governor is putting his full weight behind it. The new Secretary of Agriculture, Ken Plum, has got the bill, as do I, and numerous others, and we'll see where it goes this year.
Now, are these sardine-sized fish that are pulverized to make other things?
Well, they're anywhere from sardine-sized on up to, say, maybe 3/4 of a pound, and they have a lot of oil content in them and meal. They take a very small portion of this oil to use omega-3s, but most of it is ground up into animal protein, and most of it is from a Canadian firm that owns this omega protein. They're taking this meal, sending it to Canada to feed their farm-raised salmon, and then selling the salmon back to us.
So it doesn't help us economically very much, it sounds like.
I don't see how it does. It helps some of the omega protein folks, but we've got sport fishermen out here that's saying it's the balance of the food chain in the nursery that we call the Chesapeake Bay, and they would like to see them out. I don't have enough knowledge to say if there's enough in there or not, so let's let the scientists put a judgment on it.
Jay, the other item that you're going to have to vote on once more, apparently, in order for the citizens to decide whether there's going to be some type of redistricting commission, is in a state of flux, so to speak, because there's some of your colleagues who are now having buyer's remorse, it appears. What do you think is likely to happen?
Well, first, there should not be any buyer's remorse. This should be a no-brainer. As you know, Woody, the language for a constitutional amendment, if one comma is changed in what was passed last year, then it's off the ballot the next time around. And the next time any constitutional amendment would actually be utilized in redistricting would be 10 years from now. So in my opinion, any attempt to change what we did last year is an excuse to not have bipartisan redistricting. Now, to answer your question, what do I think is going to happen? I don't know. There have been, I can tell you, I think with some assurance, that every member of the Republican Party is going to vote to pass that
Nonpartisan redistricting
again. Yeah.
constitutional amendment.
Now, I've heard different reports on the other side of the aisle. There are some who have said we need to move forward on what we did last year. There have been some who do not want to do what we did last year, and there have been some that have been non-committal. So stay tuned.
Would there be the need to have some type of companion legislation to set forth a criteria?
Yes, there is some need to. So what the amendment would do is it would create a commission that would be made up of members of the General Assembly and citizen groups. And if for some reason they can't come to consensus on how to draw the lines, then the issue would go to the Virginia Supreme Court. And there could be some legislation that could give them guidance on what criteria to use in order to draw those lines if the commission can't agree. But that's, in my opinion, beside the point. We need to get the commission set, and quite frankly, you know, we could change the guidelines of the Supreme Court follows every year, but we just need to get the bipartisanship commission organized and in place.
Mass shooting victims. I know you've got some legislation dealing with that.
I do. The tragedy that happened in Virginia Beach in Building 2 in May 31st of last year, I put in legislation to recommend to the federal government that anybody that donated money to the Victims Fund would be tax deductible, and any victims that received the money didn't have to pay taxes on it. Well, the federal government has now passed that legislation, and we at the state recommended that. But now there's one little thing that when they probate the victims' wills, that is a state function, and I want to make sure, and I've got legislation in that none of these victims' families have to pay any probate tax.
Do you anticipate any objection to that?
No.
Good.
No, I really don't. I mean, it's a tragedy that everyone recognizes, and we've had many things that have happened through the state, and that's one thing great about our state is we always pull together.
Let me give you the last word, Jay, but I want to know what success will mean for you and Barry by the end of the session.
Well, as the last word, I just thank you for having us on the show. We appreciate the time. It's you know, we spend a lot of the year trying to raise money so we can communicate with our constituents. This is an opportunity to do it without having to spend any money, and we appreciate your role in trying to get the word out to the voters.
Thank you. Barry, good to see you. Jay, good to see you again. Good luck the rest of the session.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.